Elena Rodriguez was folding laundry in her small living room when the doorbell rang at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Living in the run-down Riverside neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble: debt collectors, social workers, or neighbors with complaints about her 3 children's noise. At 45, Elena had learned to approach her front door with caution, especially when her husband Miguel was at work at the factory and she was alone with her youngest daughter, 8-year-old Sophia. Through the peephole, Elena saw something that made no sense at all. A tall, impeccably dressed man in an expensive suit stood on her cracked concrete porch, looking completely out of place among the weathered houses and broken sidewalks of her neighborhood. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his shoes probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened immediately upon his arrival. Elena's first instinct was to pretend she wasn't home. Rich-looking strangers didn't visit Riverside unless they were lost, looking to buy drugs, or representing some government agency with bad news. Her family had been struggling to make ends meet since Miguel's hours at the plant had been cut, and they couldn't afford any new problems or complications. The man looked too clean and powerful to bring anything good into their modest world. But something about his demeanor seemed different from the usual unwelcome visitors. He wasn't looking around nervously like someone lost in a dangerous neighborhood, wasn't checking his phone impatiently, and wasn't carrying the folder or clipboard that usually accompanied official business. Instead, he stood quietly and respectfully, waiting with the patience of someone who understood that answering the door might take time. Against her better judgment, Eleanor unlocked the chain and opened the door just enough to speak through the gap. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the stranger asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who radiated such obvious wealth and authority. "My name is Jonathan Blackwood. I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping we could speak for a few minutes. It's about your son, Danny." Elena's blood ran cold at the mention of her 17-year-old son's name. Danny had been struggling in school, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and coming home late with stories that didn't quite add up. Her first thought was that this wealthy stranger was here to deliver terrible news about her eldest child. "What about Danny?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she imagined the worst-case scenarios. Had her son been arrested? Was he involved in something illegal? Had he somehow crossed paths with dangerous people who could afford to send expensive messengers to deliver threats? Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe, preparing herself for news that could destroy her family's fragile stability. Blackwood seemed to sense her fear and quickly raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Nothing bad, Mrs. Rodriguez. Actually, quite the opposite. Your son did something remarkable yesterday, and I wanted to thank him personally. May I come in for just a few minutes? I promise this is good news, not trouble." His sincerity seemed genuine, but Elena had learned through hard experience that wealthy, powerful people rarely brought good news to families like hers. Elena hesitated, torn between curiosity about Danny's supposed good deed and protective instincts honed by years of living in a neighborhood where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. This man clearly had money and influence, resources that could help or harm her family in ways she couldn't predict. After a long moment of internal debate, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She stepped back and opened the door, allowing Jonathan Blackwood to enter her humble home. As Blackwood stepped into Elena's living room, she became acutely aware of how her modest home must look to someone accustomed to luxury. The furniture was second-hand but clean, the carpet was worn but vacuumed, and children's toys were neatly organized in corners. Elena quickly cleared homework papers and laundry from the couch, apologizing for the clutter while wondering why one of the richest men in Cleveland was sitting in her living room. Jonathan Blackwood was indeed one of America's wealthiest individuals, though Eleanor had no way of knowing that. His business empire included real estate developments, manufacturing companies, and investment firms that employed thousands of people across the Midwest. His reputation in corporate circles was fearsome, a ruthless negotiator who had built his fortune by acquiring struggling companies, cutting costs aggressively, and maximizing profits without regard for the human consequences of his decisions. "Yesterday afternoon," Blackwood began, "I was leaving a business meeting downtown when my car broke down on East 55th Street. Not the safest neighborhood for someone like me to be stranded, especially with my driver's expensive watch and my obvious wealth making me a target." Eleanor knew the area well. It was even rougher than her own neighborhood, where desperate people sometimes did desperate things to survive. A wealthy man alone there would indeed be vulnerable to robbery or worse. "I was trying to call for help when 3 young men approached me," Blackwood continued. "I assumed I was about to be mugged, possibly worse. I had several $1,000s in cash, expensive jewelry, and a briefcase containing sensitive business documents. I honestly thought I might not make it home to my family that night." Eleanor found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite her initial skepticism about this unexpected visitor's motives. "Just when I thought the situation was hopeless," Blackwood continued, "your son Danny appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He stepped between me and the 3 men who were clearly planning to rob me, and he did something I've never seen before in all my years of business and negotiation." Elena held her breath, trying to imagine her sometimes troubled teenager in the role of hero protecting a wealthy stranger from dangerous criminals. "Danny didn't threaten anyone or try to fight," Blackwood explained. "Instead, he recognized one of the potential robbers as someone from his neighborhood, someone whose family was struggling with unemployment and eviction. Danny talked to them about finding better ways to solve their problems, about programs that could help with job training and family support. He turned a potential crime into a conversation about hope and alternatives." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized that her son had used the lessons she and Miguel had tried to teach him about treating everyone with dignity and respect, even in dangerous situations. Danny had seen desperate people rather than criminals, understanding that poverty and desperation could drive good people to make terrible choices. His response had been compassion rather than confrontation, exactly the kind of courage Elena had hoped to instill in her children. "Your son probably saved my life," Blackwood said simply, "but more importantly, he helped those young men see that they had choices beyond crime. He gave them my business card and told them to contact my office about job opportunities. One of them called this morning, and I'm arranging interviews for all 3. Danny turned what could have been a tragedy into an opportunity for everyone involved." As Elena processed the story of Danny's heroic intervention, Blackwood asked thoughtful questions about their neighborhood and the challenges facing families like hers. His curiosity seemed genuine rather than condescending, as if he truly wanted to understand the daily realities of people living paycheck to paycheck in Cleveland's forgotten communities. Elena found herself opening up about struggles she rarely discussed with anyone outside her immediate family. She explained how Miguel worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant, but still barely earned enough to cover rent, utilities, and groceries for their family of 5. Their oldest daughter, Maria, was academically gifted but couldn't afford college tuition. Their middle son, Carlos, was showing signs of asthma that they couldn't afford to treat properly, and Sophia needed dental work that remained beyond their financial reach, despite Miguel's employer-provided insurance with high deductibles. Elena described the neighborhood's decline over recent years as good-paying manufacturing jobs disappeared and were replaced by minimum-wage service positions that didn't provide family-sustaining incomes. Many of her neighbors worked multiple jobs, but still struggled with housing insecurity, medical debt, and the constant stress of financial instability. Children like Danny faced limited opportunities and constant pressure to find quick money through illegal activities that promised more income than legitimate employment. Blackwood listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful and troubled as Elena painted a picture of economic hardship that existed just miles from his luxury offices and gated community home. For perhaps the first time in his privileged life, he was hearing directly from someone living the consequences of the economic policies and business practices that had made him wealthy while leaving others behind. As their conversation continued, Elena mentioned that Miguel had recently been laid off from Blackwood Industries, one of Jonathan's manufacturing subsidiaries that had eliminated 200 jobs to reduce costs and increase quarterly profits. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Elena's husband had lost his job as a direct result of decisions made by the man now sitting in their living room, praising their son's character and generosity. The revelation created an awkward moment of recognition for both Elena and Jonathan. She realized she was speaking to the person ultimately responsible for her family's recent financial struggles, while he confronted the human face of his abstract business decisions. The laid-off workers had been statistics in corporate reports, but Elena was a real person dealing with real consequences of his pursuit of maximum profitability. Elena's initial reaction was anger and confusion about why the man who had destroyed her husband's livelihood was now sitting in her home talking about her son's heroism. But as she studied Jonathan's expression, she saw something she hadn't expected: genuine remorse and uncomfortable self-reflection. He seemed to be grappling with the contradiction between Danny's compassionate intervention and his own role in creating the economic desperation that drove people to crime. "I had no idea," Jonathan said quietly, his confident demeanor replaced by obvious discomfort. "When we made the decision to restructure that facility, I never thought about the specific families affected. You were just numbers on a spreadsheet, efficiency improvements that would boost stock prices. I never considered that real people like your family would lose their security and dignity because of decisions I made in boardroom meetings." Jonathan Blackwood sat in silence for several minutes, processing the connection between his business decisions and the Rodriguez family's struggles. For decades, he had insulated himself from the human consequences of corporate restructuring, plant closures, and cost-cutting measures that had built his fortune. Elena's honest description of their financial hardship forced him to confront the reality that his wealth had been built partially on the suffering of families like hers. "Your son showed more wisdom and compassion in 5 minutes than I've demonstrated in 40 years of business," Jonathan admitted. "Danny saw people in need and looked for ways to help them find legitimate opportunities. I've spent my career seeing people as expendable resources to be eliminated when they became inconvenient for profit margins. The contrast is humbling and deeply troubling." Elena watched this powerful man struggle with realizations that challenged his entire worldview and approach to business success. She had expected him to make excuses, defend his decisions, or dismiss their struggles as inevitable consequences of economic reality. Instead, she was witnessing what appeared to be genuine moral awakening from someone who had never been forced to confront the human cost of his corporate actions. "I came here to thank your son for his heroism," Jonathan continued, "but I'm leaving with a much deeper understanding of the problems I've helped create. Danny's courage in protecting a stranger has shown me that I've been a coward, hiding behind corporate structures and avoiding responsibility for the impact of my decisions on real families like yours." After a long pause, Jonathan made an offer that left Elena speechless. "I want to make things right, starting with your family," he said. I'm going to personally ensure that Miguel gets his job back with a promotion and salary increase. But more than that, I want to establish a community investment fund that creates real opportunities for families in neighborhoods like this one." Elena's first reaction was skepticism. Wealthy people made promises all the time, especially when they wanted to feel better about their consciences. But follow-through was rare when the cameras weren't rolling and the emotional moment had passed. She had learned not to trust offers that seemed too good to be true, especially from people whose interests were fundamentally different from her family's needs. But Jonathan seemed to anticipate her doubts and immediately began outlining specific, concrete steps he would take. He would establish a $50 million community development fund focused on job creation, small business loans, educational scholarships, and healthcare access for Riverside residents. Miguel would be rehired as a supervisor with a 20% salary increase, and the plant would prioritize hiring from the local community rather than seeking cheaper labor elsewhere. "This isn't charity," Jonathan explained. "It's justice. I've made billions of dollars through business practices that extracted wealth from communities like this one. Danny's example has shown me that true success should be measured by how we lift others up, not by how much we can take for ourselves. I want to spend my remaining years rebuilding what I've torn down." Within a week of Jonathan's visit, word of his commitment to the Riverside neighborhood began spreading through the community. Elena initially worried that the attention might bring unwanted scrutiny or false hope to neighbors who'd been disappointed by broken promises before. But Jonathan's actions quickly demonstrated that his commitment was genuine and comprehensive, not just a wealthy man's temporary guilt-driven gesture. The first visible changes came when construction crews arrived to begin renovating the abandoned community center that had been closed for budget cuts 5 years earlier. Jonathan had purchased the building and committed to transforming it into a hub for job training, childcare services, and community programming. Local residents were hired for the renovation work, providing immediate employment while building infrastructure for long-term community development. Miguel returned to work, not just with his old position restored, but as a supervisor responsible for training programs that would provide pathways to good-paying jobs for other neighborhood residents. The plant began partnering with the local high school to offer apprenticeships and technical training, creating opportunities for young people like Danny to build careers without leaving their community or resorting to illegal activities for income. Elena found herself at the center of the transformation as Jonathan asked her to serve on the community advisory board that would guide the investment fund's priorities and ensure that programs met real needs rather than outside assumptions about what the neighborhood required. Her first-hand experience with the challenges facing working families made her an invaluable voice in designing effective interventions. As news of the community investment spread, Danny became a local hero and role model for other teenagers facing difficult choices about their futures. His courage in protecting a stranger had catalyzed changes that were transforming opportunities for everyone in the neighborhood. Other young people began approaching him for advice about staying in school, finding legitimate employment, and avoiding the temptations of quick money through illegal activities. Jonathan established a special scholarship program named in Danny's honor, providing full college tuition for neighborhood students who demonstrated both academic potential and community leadership. Danny became the program's first recipient, with plans to study social work and return to serve his community as a professional advocate for families facing the same challenges his own family had overcome. The transformation in Danny's own prospects was remarkable. 6 months earlier, he had been struggling in school and hanging around with friends who were headed toward trouble. Now he was student council president, captain of the debate team, and a peer counselor helping other students make positive choices. His example proved that young people could thrive when given genuine opportunities and support. Elena watched her son's evolution with pride and amazement, recognizing that his moment of courage had not only saved a stranger, but had fundamentally changed the trajectory of his own life and the lives of countless neighbors. Danny's decision to choose compassion over conflict had created ripple effects that continued expanding throughout the community. Jonathan Blackwood's involvement in the Riverside community marked a complete transformation in his approach to business and philanthropy. He began restructuring his entire corporate empire, implementing policies that prioritized employee welfare, community development, and sustainable business practices over short-term profit maximization. His boardroom decisions now included consideration of human impact alongside financial projections. The media initially dismissed Jonathan's community investment as a publicity stunt or tax avoidance scheme, but sustained commitment and measurable results gradually convinced skeptics that his transformation was genuine. Other wealthy business leaders began following his example, creating a movement toward more responsible corporate citizenship that originated from a teenager's courage in a dangerous Cleveland neighborhood. Jonathan's relationship with the Rodriguez family deepened beyond the original gesture of gratitude. He became a regular presence at community events, genuinely interested in understanding the ongoing challenges and celebrating the successes that resulted from collaborative investment and local leadership. Elena often marveled at how the fearsome billionaire had become a trusted friend and advocate for her family and neighbors. The changes in Jonathan's personal life were equally dramatic. His own family, estranged for years due to his workaholism and emotional unavailability, began reconnecting as they witnessed his newfound capacity for empathy and genuine relationships. His wife noted that he seemed happier and more fulfilled than he had been during decades of single-minded wealth accumulation. 2 years after Jonathan Blackwood first knocked on Elena Rodriguez's door, the Riverside neighborhood had been transformed into a model of community-driven economic development. The unemployment rate had dropped by 60%, high school graduation rates had increased dramatically, and crime had decreased as young people found legitimate pathways to success and contribution. The community center served hundreds of families weekly, offering everything from job training to childcare to healthcare services. Elena's own life had changed beyond her wildest dreams. She had completed her GED and was studying to become a community health worker, combining her natural caregiving instincts with professional training that would allow her to serve her neighbors more effectively. Miguel had been promoted again and was leading efforts to expand the job training programs to other struggling communities throughout Ohio. Danny graduated as valedictorian of his high school class and received a full scholarship to Ohio State University, where he planned to study social work and public policy. His younger siblings were thriving academically and socially, benefiting from the expanded opportunities and stability that had resulted from their brother's moment of heroic intervention. The family that had once struggled to make ends meet was now financially secure and deeply involved in community leadership. The story of the fearsome billionaire who knocked on a poor woman's door had become legendary throughout Cleveland, inspiring other acts of cross-class cooperation and community investment. Jonathan's example proved that wealth could be used as a tool for healing rather than exploitation, and that genuine transformation was possible when people chose courage and compassion over fear and self-interest. Most importantly, the neighborhood had learned that change was possible when individuals took responsibility for each other's well-being. Danny's split-second decision to protect a stranger had created a cascade of positive changes that would benefit generations of families. Elena often reflected on how a simple act of courage had proved that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they chose love over fear, connection over isolation, and hope over despair. The fearsome billionaire's transformation had begun with a teenager's compassion, proving that true power lay not in wealth or influence, but in the willingness to see and serve the humanity in everyone we encounter.